Hello.
Hello.
Hello, ladies. How are you?
With Rachel and I today. David, what time is it with you? Because you're in Aussie.
Yeah, it's 4:35 Sunday afternoon right now.
Wow, that's so much later, isn't it? Gosh.
Yeah,
It's
7 hours.
fascinating.
About 7 hours.
How far behind the US are you? Because I mean, it's about 7 or 8 hours, depending on where they are in the US to us. So it's probably almost nearly 24 hours, is it? Or 18?
Sometimes. I used to live in Melbourne and I was working with a company in the PST time. And it was about, with, sometimes it's daylight savings and, we both had daylight savings. So at one point, I think it was like 19 hours or something difference, but I'm in Perth on the West Coast, and with the PST, I think they are about 17 hours. No, 16 hours behind, I think. So, yeah. But I look at it the other way because they're sleeping now. So I look at it like they're 9 hours ahead. It's easier. It's easier that way.
Right. That's a good idea. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then it's not too different. So thank you so much. And really such a pleasure to see you, because we saw a little video of you on Janine's show, because you sent her a happy birthday message. That was so lovely. Really lovely.
Yeah, I really wish I could have been there. Thank you for the invite, and thanks for playing it, because it was a good session. I mean, a good video you guys did, and everybody brought their balloons and their message. It was really, really touching.
Yeah, wasn't it? And some awesome questions asked, actually. They really were.
Yeah. I think it was really good. And for me, it sort of pulls in something I wanted to talk about today, actually. We've got so much to talk about today. But before we get into that, can you tell us a bit about yourself for our listeners, David? Because a lot of people have seen you with Janine, but don't necessarily know much about you as a person. So how did you get into this journey?
Yeah, good question. So I think it all kind of started when my dad got me into 9/11 a long time ago, probably 2010-ish, maybe 2009, around that time. And he was one of the people, because I was like 17, 18 when that happened, and didn't really know anything about anything, and kind of just saw it for what it was, thought it, and then it wasn't till a few years later that some documentaries came out, because at that time there were no cell phones really. No one, if it was these days, that would last 2 seconds, that story. But it got a lot of people, kind of fooled for quite a while. I watched a lot of documentaries, and when my background's accounting, I was always studying accounting, working as an accountant, and I moved to the UK in 2013, and I worked over there in London for nearly 2 years as an accountant. But whilst I was over there, because I had so much more free time, I wasn't studying anymore. For some reason, I just went down all these rabbit holes, and I started learning more about the Illuminati. Well, can you say that? The enlightened ones, we'll call it, in the music industry, and that name kept coming up. I was like, these people are responsible for 9/11. These people are responsible for the music industry, or they're in the music industry. And I was like, who are these people? Like, what are they? What's their deal? So I kind of did a bit of research, and back then, obviously, that was a time in YouTube where you could pretty much search anything you wanted, and it wasn't going to get censored, because there was no censorship back then, really, unless it was something really bad, right? So yeah, I went down this massive rabbit hole, and it was probably 2013, 14 when I discovered let's call it the world agenda, the agenda for the world, and the people behind that, and the NWO. And that was, obviously, I didn't know everything, like I knew that there was a plan to enslave us and to take over the world, so to speak. But fast forward, I kind of stopped doing that research for a few years, and then started a business. I moved to Melbourne when I got back from London. I moved to Melbourne and started a business. So I was very busy with that. But when 2020 hit, obviously something really, really, let's call it really dodgy. It was like 2019, the end of 2019, when things were happening overseas in China and stuff. And you didn't think too much of it because they hadn't come to your country yet, right? But then in March, when pretty much every country just went into systematic lockdown, at the same time, that was when I started going, okay, what's going on here? And there was something a little bit very strange about this. And it only took about 2 weeks before videos started popping up in YouTube about, let's call it, an alternative view about the whole bat, you know, the bat story and everything, which is complete BS. But that was when I started, and then I got really worried. Actually, I remember saying to my mum, I was like, I'm really worried at this point, you know, because I didn't know anything about the children, didn't know anything about really just how infiltrated everything had been, you know, and they had a hand in everything. You know, I didn't know that at that point. All I knew was that we were going to have a very, let's call it an interesting time over the next few years, because things were starting to go down a road that I didn't really think was for the benefit of humanity. And I started paying attention. I was paying attention to this guy who's in the financial field. He's an investor and he's on YouTube, and he was talking about, because obviously, as you know, they control a lot of things through the financial system, and that they keep us enslaved in debt, and they use that to their advantage and all that stuff. And he was talking about what's supposed to be coming down the pipeline, and it was all getting very negative for me. I was like, this is I don't want to listen to this. I started tuning into Dave Wilcock for some reason. I discovered him a few years before, but for some reason he was doing a lot of like 4-hour, 5-hour videos, if you remember last year, about this time last year. And
yeah, I was watching a lot of those as well.
Yeah, and that was when I first heard about the Alliance, and I was like, okay, this is a lot more, you know, this is something that I can actually consume that's way more positive than what the other guy was saying. But then it was everything just started coming out, like Out of Shadows, the documentary, and the Janet Osbard series, and you know, that was when I was like, okay, this is crazy. And they just went down this crazy rabbit hole, and I haven't stopped, you know, ever since then. And it's, you know, it has its moments, doesn't it? You know, this is really heavy stuff, and you got to protect yourself. And I watched, you know, that 5-hour documentary thing that just came out recently. I was really depressed after watching that for 2 or 3 days, and everybody I know was really depressed too. And somebody thought that they had a spell on it, so I asked Janine to look at that in the last video I did with her, and it didn't have a spell on it. But you know, it was I don't know what the reason was that everybody was so depressed, and because I already kind of knew most of that stuff anyway, and I wasn't surprised at it all. But there was something in there, and yeah, so here we are, you know. And we were in a lockdown in February, and my city actually was, let's call it, kind of in the clear, if you know what I mean. Like, I know London has been crazy, and most of the UK. I have a friend in Scotland and some friends in London, and Melbourne, Victoria, that was probably our equivalent of London over here. They had like 3 or 4 months of lockdowns or something, you know, like non-stop, really bad ones too, like curfew and loads of, you know, what's it called? Protesting was made illegal there, so you couldn't protest. Like, once all the BLM protests were out of the way, then they made protesting illegal.
Exactly. Yeah.
And and so we got thrown into a 5-day lockdown in February, and that was when I started to get into. I was kind of like, should I be doing? You know, when you're on that kind of, you're just trying to decide, should I do something about this? Should I, do I really want to go through this period of time, which is arguably the most important period in our life? Well, in our lives, absolutely the most important period, but in humanity's existence, you know, thus far, do I want to actually go through that period and just be a bystander, you know? And the answer was no. So I got Janine on, and that was, you know, obviously out of my comfort zone. I was a bit kind of, I was a bit scared about putting that video out at first, and then doing more videos with her and asking about certain people and things. And yeah, so ever since then, I just haven't stopped putting out videos, and I've been having different people on, and it's been a really interesting journey. So I already had a channel before that, but I wasn't really doing a lot with it. You know, I was releasing a few videos here and there. I was doing a video a week for a while, but then last year I had a bunch of things, you know, when you put out stuff, and I was putting stuff out on Facebook, and then people were just reacting really badly, getting triggered by this information. And it put me in a place where I was obviously consciously aware of, like, if I put out this kind of information, then I have to have an anxiety attack when I go onto Facebook every time. So I kind of stopped doing it, you know. But you know, you kind of have to you got to put yourself aside, you know, and just do what you think is right. And it's not, you can't really worry about your own ego or your own I don't want to say you don't want to worry about your own well-being. You have to worry about your own well-being, but at the same time, you have to be, not fearful. Yeah.
Yes, a baseball bat.
Yeah, I so agree with all of that. I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it, how people get into it? And Rachel and I have some amazing conversations sort of offline. And one of the things we've been speaking about a lot this week is exactly what you just mentioned at the end there, in terms of, this is such an important time in terms of the whole world and what's going on and the future of humanity for those of us that believe this agenda that we all believe. Other people, I think, are still quite oblivious to it. But, I from a personal point of view, as a mum of 2-legged and 4-legged babies, not very small babies now, I can't imagine not standing up and doing something about it, because I've reached a stage where I've traveled all over the world, spent a nice year in Australia when I was younger, traveled all over the world, worked in different countries, had an amazing time. I've now got my little mini farm back at home with all my rescue animals and everything, and I'm really happy. But I've got 2 teenagers that are just at the start of their real exploration of life and going out into the world and wanting to do amazing things and contribute and everything, and their whole future's on the line with all of this, massively. And I was pregnant with my daughter on a course, and I can so remember the day because I was on a course with one of my best friends, Steve, and they called us all out of the course and put the TV on showing us 9/11. And I can remember at the time I was very heavily pregnant, just about to give birth to my daughter, and just thinking, that is just impossible. That's just not true. Now, I didn't know any more than that at that, because nothing was coming out. The whole line was just, this is true. And virtually everyone I know, apart from the people that I was speaking to in this community, virtually everyone I know still believes that 9/11 was as they showed on the TV.
Right.
Quite incredible. Yeah. Really, really intelligent people that, and even when you say to them, well, how could an aluminium plane go through something like that and leave that? So even when you look at it from more of an objective engineering point of view rather than a conspiracy point of view, they still don't see it. And then you sort of think, then you start to think, wow, when you look back about the whole education system is completely controlled. I've been a herbalist for a long while and work in natural health, and for years and years and years we've been completely censored about what we can sell, what we can say, and everything. So knowing that how much censorship is coming from the pharmaceutical companies has been going on for years, as long as I can ever remember. But there's been a real ramp up in the censorship over the last year and a half, hasn't there? Massively so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Frightening. I mean, why do we think, well, we know why, but do you think this is the ramp up and the censorship? Do you think that's a positive thing in terms of they must realise how many people are, whether we want to call it awake or aware?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you see it on, I watched this mini, I was watching a Flat Earth documentary, and basically their way of ridiculing things, or maybe not so much ridiculing, but also to debunk whatever it is that's coming out on social media, whether that be YouTube or Instagram, Facebook, and things like that, is just to put a little note down the bottom where it says something about the Jabberwocky, or something about the flat earth is an archaic theory, blah, 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 or something like that. So there's all of these little fact check things, and that's their way of debunking things. And
disinformation.
Yeah. So I think you can probably bet your bottom dollar that anytime you see one of those, the post that you're viewing is probably quite likely true,
Yeah.
And so is it a good thing? Yes, until they actually take the post down, I think. Because if you're aware, you know what I mean? If you're aware of what it is, then sure. But if you're not, then you can just see that little thing and go, okay, well, this post is not true then, right? But
I don't think there's anything about the censorship that's good. I mean, I'm a biologist, and all my biologist friends think I'm a complete nut, even though they're quite happy to come to me when one of their children or animals are ill.
Yeah.
And then they're prepared to listen. But most of the time, you know, as soon as you mention anyone like David Icke or any of the alternative narratives, and even something so simple. So most of my friends that I was at university with work in the pharmaceutical industry, and I find this absolutely fascinating. And they still will not enter into a discussion. They just will not enter into it about the PCR test. It's just bizarre. And they're all very high up in various pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
But that is a certain type of cognitive dissonance where you won't even, they call themselves scientists, but they won't even enter into discussion on it. Whilst for me, having been a scientist all my life, the whole point about science is you're constantly challenging every hypothesis and you're constantly looking at, is this true or is it not true? You don't learn something and then believe that for the rest of your life. That's not science.
No, I completely agree. And it's the, if anything is being kind of taken for a ride right now, it's the science behind everything that's going on. With the tests, with the different measures that they're putting in place to, you know, supposedly stop this thing. You know, none of it makes sense, right? So how could it should be uniform, right? But it's all these different crazy rules.
So you started, I suppose, waking up with your father talking about the 9/11 side of things. And I think
kinda, yeah. I guess so. But it wasn't until
March last year.
Yeah, I had a spiritual awakening in like 2017, 18-ish, kind of realized that it happened in 2019. So I was a lot more awake then. I think there's a big difference between being awake and aware. So you can be awake. I think sometimes they go hand in hand. Yeah, as an example, one of the posts I put out last year when the government decided that the Jabberwocky would be mandatory, and then they backtracked a few days later, I put a post out about it, and it was no real surprise that everybody I knew prior to my last 5-year journey was on one side of the scale, and everybody I'd met ever since then was on the side that I was now on. You know, so it's not a surprise. But you know, you can be aware about what's going on, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're awake. But I think that there is an element of being awake, you know, in being aware as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And Catherine, you know, I suppose from the herbal side, so because Catherine had her own naturally animal shop that I used to purchase lots and lots for my horse. But Catherine and I met because I rescued a horse who was being treated by a vet. And I think the final straw came because this vet was feeding him steroids, and he was just getting worse and worse, and his immune system was being whacked by this stuff. And then she said, because he basically had a cough, it wasn't anything major, you know, it wasn't about to die or anything, and I had to change all his stable and all this, that, and the other, and then she said, you need to give him an inhaler. And I said, are you a racehorse? Because he'd done the Melbourne Cup, actually. He'd just come back from Australia. He'd done the Melbourne Cup. And I said, are you trying to kill me or something? I said, feeding, you know, giving a racehorse an inhaler. I said, can you imagine what's going to happen, like, in his face? Anyway, so I thought, this is the last straw. I've got to find some other way in order to sort this out. And someone suggested Catherine as an alternative, and she did all this amazing natural stuff. So Catherine came out for a consult, and we spent the day, I can't remember how long, it was most of the day, I'm sure, feeding him hawthorn and oils. And Catherine did the most amazing thing. She took him into the stable and took a picture of his eye, which is all the iridology, essentially, I suppose, a bit like the reflexology, where your whole body is mapped out in different areas of your body. But so we did the iridology with him, and I learned so much in that one day. Absolutely incredible. And so that's where I started learning about the veterinary industry. And then a few years later, I was quite ill and ended up eating similar food to my horse. cured my whole body. I mean, I had all sorts of health issues because I'd had my appendix out when I was younger and then had an infection afterwards and blah, blah, you know, so things kind of amounted and amounted. And I thought I was healthy, literally didn't realize at all much about health whatsoever. So I started this cleanse. I phoned up Catherine. I said, you know, I'm in a really bad state. She said, I've just found this amazing company. And so so I did a cleanse, but I was really ill through it all. And basically, I think within a month, fixed my body. And I could not believe the difference. Everything. I had ulcers and bleeding in my stomach and and then awful, I suppose, from a female perspective, periods and all the rest of it. Everything just completely dissipated, and I was absolutely fine. I had tons of energy. I'd lost loads of. I think in 3 months, I went from a size 16 to a size 8. I don't know if the sizes are similar or different.
Yeah, huge difference.
Yeah, so we popped to America to find out more about this company. I mean, that was fantastic in itself. But we discovered. Well, I discovered so much, and I think the realization. I think at the end of it, I did a video about this, you know, this cleanse, and you know how amazing it's been. Thinking that loads of people would want to get in contact and find out more about it, and it never went anywhere. So many people saw it on my Facebook. Yeah. I was blown away. Like, people do not want to change. They don't want to make anything better until they have pain, you know, and then they have to get out of it. So that was a wake-up call. But the health industry and learning what Catherine could actually physically say on her website, you know, you can't say anything cures anything, even though pharmaceuticals foundation is all natural, you know, and then they add all their crap all over it. But it was fascinating, and that's where I started learning that, you know, this industry, especially the pharmaceutical, the veterinary, I didn't understand about education. I didn't understand about I suppose all the trafficking and everything that's happening or been happening for, I suppose, since the beginning of time, really. That there's, you know, and everything that is natural and works and, you know, is part of nature is woo-woo.
Yeah, so weird, isn't it? It's this backwards society that we live in.
Completely. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there are so many different ways to look at everything. And, you know, people have their own experiences of the way that we wake up. And I think with this situation, I started really learning more because I was camping in the middle of March last year in Wales. And I'd gone to climb Tiffin, which is near Snowdonia. And the next day, literally, all the paths, all the mountains were shut. You weren't allowed to go for a walk. And I just thought, that is ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. There's some fallacy here because this is crap. So that was, and then I saw all sorts of crazy videos about China and all the rest of it. So I just thought, oh my goodness. And that was the start of it, really. But then you go down so many rabbit holes. I mean, there literally are so many rabbit holes.
Yep, there are, but they're all connected in some way as well. And that's the interesting thing, isn't it?
Do you find it interesting, both of you? Because one of the things, so all of us being into sort of natural health and everything, and anyone who's spiritual understands that everyone and everything in the universe is connected. And the way, I'm just going to call it the dark side, to not use any trigger words, as you just said there, David, hit the nail on the head. Now we're realizing all of their stuff is connected. And the whole thing about the way they work is this inversion. They turn everything upside down. But isn't it interesting, on the good side, the spirituality, we realize that everything is connected in a good way. And they are using that connection in a dark energy way.
Yeah, it's true.
It's quite fascinating when you see, because when I started looking into it, I mean, I am so ignorant. My son's studying politics and economics. I know nothing about politics at all. I never have, because I've never believed a word that any of them say. So I've never followed them. So I'm one of those embarrassing people at a dinner party where I cannot have a conversation at all about politics, because I won't even know who's in. I just about know the Prime Minister, and that's just the end of my knowledge. And now I'm so pleased about that. So I've been laughed at for years for being completely ignorant on that.
Yeah.
But actually, it's interesting because when you know nothing about something, you can look at things through a new pair of eyes. So in the horse world, we always say they're the most difficult people to get out of old habits. You know, the analogy, just because I've always done something doesn't make it right. And there's any one of us who's an expert in certain areas, we have a lot almost to unlearn before we can look at the new stuff. But when you know nothing about it, you don't have all that baggage to unlearn. So it can actually be a blessing in disguise, I think.
I would agree. I'm the same as you. Didn't really care about politics. Used to donkey vote when I went to vote because I didn't know who to vote for. And it wasn't until last year that I started paying attention to it, you know, especially in America. And we had a bit of a leadership crisis here. I mean, there's a leadership crisis all around the world, but we had one in Australia where for a period of time, for maybe about 13 years, our prime minister just kept changing. They got fired or they got overruled or they got, you know, something happened and they didn't serve out their entire term. And that was really odd. And I didn't know what to think of it. But yeah, it's interesting looking at things with a clean slate and seeing, I guess, you know, because people are very one way or another, and that's why they vote. But when you're in the middle and you don't have any, even if your parents or your friends are one way, you know, you don't have anything to really go off of. It does make it easier to see things for what they are rather than the skewed vision. And I think that's the problem that we all have as humans, is that we all have some sort of skewing, whether it's in any way. So you know, that's why people can't see it. Even with, you would think, right, that over the last 13, 14 months that pretty much everybody would be able to see something going on whilst it's happening right in front of their face, but they can't. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that is also just the media, because people like us and other people in this community, we may not watch the media, we might, but even if we do, we still got a lot of other sources. You know, we're seeing two sides of the story instead of just one side, and you can, and most people aren't seeing that. So it doesn't, it's, on one hand, it surprises me that people aren't seeing things going on as they're happening, but on the other hand, they're just not seeing it because they're not being shown it by the you know, by the media sources. So
it's a bit like reading a book though, isn't it? Every time you read a book, you read something different in it because something else aligns. So it's, I suppose, where you're at that one point as to what you understand from it. But yeah, I remember showing my mum the video of it was one of the politicians in the UK, and he basically blatantly said not many people or which will have, I think it was like 15% deaths from the Jabberwocky. And she said, no, he's just said it incorrectly. He's just put the comma in the wrong place. Right. She was already making it straight away. I was just, you know, I just walked away. I just thought, she just will never accept it.
Yeah, what's funny is I saw Boris Johnson say something about it, and it's happening a lot. Like it happened here with one of the people over east, and it's happened even on TV and stuff, where people will say something like, I'm sure you guys saw that video with the newsreader saying he said euthanized instead of immunized.
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of similar to that, but they didn't correct themselves. They just put a word in there, and you're wondering, like, why'd they say that? It's like, you know, is it
sterilized? Did you see the one, David, where they said sterilized as well? One of the scientists said only X amount of people will be sterilized by this, and it's just like Rachel said, when Rachel and I were like, look at this, and then we showed them to other people, and just, well, that's just a silly mistake. Don't read too much into it.
That's the thing,
and you're
isn't
like,
it?
It's a bit like when you're drunk, as Rachel and I know, you know, the truth comes out, doesn't it? You know, sometimes the truth comes out. It's so fascinating. I mean, I come from a family where when we grew up, I think we should have been Italian, not British, because we're not typically British, where we had passionate conversations about things and we debated things. And that's how, when I grew up, we used to learn a lot, where you could have, even at school, you could have different sides and different opinions having a really good discussion about things. And I don't think there's ever one of those that you come out of where you haven't learned something constructive. So I did a video this week with one of my friends, Jonathan Marshall, and we were talking about animals and using them as working animals. And we've got quite different views on that. Neither of us are right or wrong. We're just different sides of the spectrum on that. But I came out learning so much about that, and I'm sure he did. And then people watch it and they say, oh, well, that's a bit, oh, you nearly got into an argument then. And we didn't feel we got into an argument. We were just having a really excitable conversation about things. But what I notice in my children's schooling, so one of my children's 21 and one's 19, they have no debates. They've never grown up with any debates. Obviously in our house they have, but not at school. And I think that whole, when you look at mainstream media of any sort, whether it's in the papers or things, you're not allowed to have a debate. There's so many jab experts that have wanted to go on TV and have a serious debate with the scientists. And you say, look, you say yours, because I am 100% for informed choice. Okay, I really am. But people can't have informed choice if they only ever hear one side of the argument.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
what's it like in Australia, David? I mean, do you have many on any of your media? Do you have any good old-fashioned debates where you've got people from different sides?
I don't really watch it. So I wouldn't know. The only time I do see it is when I'm at the gym and I have no control over the TV. To be perfectly honest, you know, I really dislike it. It's like, you know what it's like. It's horrendous. And but the one thing I do enjoy actually, which is bringing, you know, a lot of delight into my life recently, is going there and seeing the rollout of the Jabberwocky just falling flat in its face. I don't know what it's like for you guys, but for us here, it's just not gaining any traction. We're way below targets. We were supposed to have 4 million people done by the end of March. It's now in May and they've only done like 1 million. And I would say that's probably an inflated figure too. Let's be honest, it's the media. So yeah, it's interesting to see. There's actually a hub. You guys have mass hubs where they go, yeah, but there's one down.
Every time I drive past them, I want to stop and get my marker pen. And when it says vaccination centre, I want to scrub it out and put death camp. But there's already too many people around with me. And I might do it next week because I can afford to get arrested next week.
Yeah, there's actually one down the road from my house and really like 5 minutes walk. So they're dotted around the city, but I think I might go there and have, you know, check out and do a video. But it's really crazy because, you know, that from what I understand, you know, some of my friends have got it now, and I actually had, it's difficult to see, you know, like what is going on. Like, is it some are placebo, some are really bad, you know, obviously doing some damage. Is there actually a good one that's kind of giving people some healing qualities? I don't know. Is it saline? All I know is that, yeah, there are definitely some bad ones. And my cousins, for some reason, like one of my aunties who lives in Singapore, she knows a lot of people that have been really badly affected by this thing. In fact, her daughter's mother-in-law, so her sister-in-law actually, took it, and she collapsed into a coma. She was in the ICU for 4 days, and then her toes turned blue, and she had to have her leg amputated after this thing.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and my auntie knows like at least 2 other people that have passed away from this thing. So yeah. It's pretty nuts. You know, I heard that you guys have had like 30% done or something. Is that
more than that?
It's more, you reckon?
I think you've benefited, Rachel. I'd love your opinion on this, but I think you in Australia have benefited from being behind us in America and Israel in the rollout. But in the UK, if you believe the figures, but unfortunately, this is one set of figures I do believe, because Rachel and I have discussed this a lot. Most adults have had it, and now they're trying to roll it out to children. So I think it's well over 50%. And I would say we have this, we've had loads of discussions on this. So Rachel and I, you know, we're talking about people. How many people know someone who's actually died from CV? And most people don't, or they've been people with really strong comorbidities. But everyone I know knows someone who's died or had serious complications from the Jabberwocky. And I don't think the figures are inflated here, because there's been such a huge push that Rachel and I have had many a tearful conversation about it, where, haven't we, Rachel, where so many people we know have had it for various different reasons. But I listened to a really good interview with my friend Kelly Rivers, who had Judy Mikovich on. And I've spoken to Judy a couple of times. Her brain is just off the scale. And she came out with a point that I think is really brilliant. So a lot of people have been saying, obviously, there's good versions and bad versions, and wondering why Trump's promoting them and things like this. And it's been a mystery to all of us. But she summed it up perfectly to me. She said they all admit, all the companies that are issuing these things believe that they're all openly part of a clinical trial that doesn't end to 2023. And in any clinical trial, you have to have a certain number of placebos. So it makes certain sense that some people are getting a placebo and some people are getting the real thing. And they will know, because they'll be tracking the serial numbers. So only they will know who's getting which. But equally, it could be that they're making it easy by doing certain countries. So certain countries might be getting the placebo lot, because obviously that's a lot easier to administer, sending a whole batch of one than so. And also the admin side of things, of working at the results. So where a lot of spiritual people have been saying, you know, some of them aren't as bad, I'm sure some of them aren't, but what a Russian roulette to take with your health, because some of them blatantly are the real ones. And also, so many people, Rachel and I know, isn't it, Rachel, that they've all been saying, well, I've had mine and I'm fine. What's going to happen? All the scientists are very clearly saying, look, what's going to happen next winter when the wild coronaviruses take hold and you get exposed to them. So it's
or other things too.
Carry on.
Or other things, you know, like just some things just lay dormant. Like some doctors are saying that nothing will really happen till about 3 or 4 months. Well into like years. You know, you may pass away years from now, and
exactly,
you won't
and
even
then
know.
never link it back.
No, they won't link it. But then I don't know if you know much about India, and it would be great to really find out exactly what's happening out there. But on the Indian government website, they stated that they started mass vaccination on the 2nd of November in 2020.
Right.
So that was before the UK, the US. So essentially, they're about 6 weeks ahead of us, really. And there's all these crazy reports going on. And
6 weeks
I don't know,
months?
Weeks.
Okay.
Weeks. So
we started ours, David, before yours. We started ours.
December, was it December the 30th? It was William Shakespeare was the first lady.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
I can't remember what the lady was called, but
she was crisis actor anyway. But again, no one believes.
I saw that photo. She was.
Yeah. You see all the symbols.
It's crazy how she was just rolling down the corridor. Someone's pushing her, and she was doing that symbol the whole way. I was like, what the hell?
Isn't it funny? And that when you point that out, everyone is so happy to fight for their limitations. But Rachel, you were saying, you sent me that thing about supposedly the birds dying in India as well.
Yes. Now, I think the first sign of, was it October 2019? I think it was something to do with the 5 thing. Technology being rolled out, basically, that, you know, there were a load of birds just dropping out of the sky. And I know people who live in the countryside really noticed a lot of deaths, you know, just blatantly all over, littered deaths of animals. And there are a lot less birds out here now, I think, personally, from what I remember of being a child. But there was this post that I read this morning of a load of birds in India. I mean, they're so jolly colourful in tropical places. But it's just so sad to see, you know, this atrocity. But then I don't know how much of it is fear mongering, you know.
Whether that's an old photo or not of. that happens with the pesticide. This is the problem, isn't it? We don't know, because on both sides of the scale, there's so much disinformation, which is really fascinating. And one of the things I want to ask you both, because I think this is really key to everyone, is you mentioned, David, about watching that 5-hour program, which I'm about halfway through. And I can't say it made me fearful, but I was intrigued by, one, how wide scale it was, and some of my favorites were on that. But also, two, I'm wondering, and I haven't got to the end, so perhaps it might answer when I get to the end of it, because normally I listen to videos when I'm walking the dogs or picking the horses or doing all my chores, so I don't watch. But with that one, you have to watch the video, don't you? Because so much of it is visual. You can't just listen to it. And I'm wondering how many of these famous people have actually, because there's almost two, if you take the celebrity side of things, there's almost two categories of celebrities. There's the celebrities that are always in the public eye. And then there's also some really famous ones that very much keep themselves to themselves and never go to the parties and never publicize themselves. Do you think that some of them got into it or got coerced into it, realized what was going on, and then removed themselves from it?
I think anything's possible. I also think that with those photos, you know, how, because he was obviously his photo evidence of people doing certain things, and Dave Rodriguez said, because he knows some celebrities, he was saying that very often the photographer tells the people what to do, and sometimes they don't know it. And maybe not so much now, but a long time ago they would do these things and they didn't know why they were doing it, and those were the only photos that they would publish. So just them doing it doesn't necessarily mean that they're involved. But I would say that to reach a certain level of success, it seems to be the case that you need to kind of do something to get there, you know, and it's not just producing a great movie or writing a great book, or, you know what I mean? Yeah.
I think there was also an element to it missing. I think Janine, I think, struck on this one with regards to, you know, The Secret, the documentary. So the one thing that was missing from The Secret was the physical action of something, you know, and actually doing something to manifest, because then it brings it into your reality and then you bring more of it there. But I think from that documentary, although I think it was absolutely fascinating, very interesting and very, very sad also, because so many people look up to these, you know, these amazing stars, and I've had photographs with some of them a few years ago. But in terms of kind of understanding who's actually in power at the moment, and it is, you know, I suppose in energy world, and looking into it with Janine and different people, that, you know, is the White Hats, and they're you know, taking that document that was created for the rollout 2025 to 2028. It's a PDF document. And it's essentially exactly that, between 2021 and 2023. But it's, you know, letter to letter, what essentially they're rolling out in the world. And so they've you know, they've made
it up, you reckon?
Yeah, they've massively sped it up in order to start really waking up the masses. Because I think if it was done incrementally, as how they, I think, initially planned it, I don't know if we would have had the degree of people actually being awake. So, you know, the atrocities in Germany and their rights, you know, being taken away. I think, I mean, even our country is really quite bad in terms of our rights now. You know, but things are getting more and more escalated. So I have a friend who lives next to Luton Airport down in London, and she said that yesterday there was masses and masses of helicopters, like no aeroplanes, but lots and lots of helicopters going on. And then I saw a Telegram post, which is why I actually asked her in the first place this morning. I saw a post about there not being any air travel from Heathrow, Gatwick and Luton, which are the main airports around London, basically. So so she said yes, no, she agreed that there were, you know, very few aeroplanes, because she could see them taking off and landing from where she lives. So interesting to have that kind of on the ground information to kind of find out exactly what's going on. And I think that's, I'm missing that from India. It would be great to speak to somebody, you know, who's actually physically living in India to find out, you know, is this birds thing actually true? Right. You know, what about all these deaths, and are they actually from an explosion, and, you know, recreating these images? Because I know that the hospitals, you know, they've used the same images from so many, you know, for so many different countries. It's exactly the same ward, you know. It's just biggest belief, honestly. And I do remember right at the beginning there was, and I posted it on Facebook, that this area of the country have had 33 new cases, and this part of the country have had 33 new cases, and they were all exactly the same. 33, 33, 33.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was really chuffed with that one, because I posted it on Facebook, and people that I know are fast asleep were like, what? You know, so all these things will start building up. And I watched your session that you did for Janine. It was maybe 4 days ago or something, but you'd asked, you know, I think how many people are actually awake, or, you know, realizing what's actually going on, and she said, you know, that they're banking up all these experiences, but from the outset you wouldn't necessarily know that they've actually changed their mind, or are changing their minds, or waking up. But these things, these anomalies, they're all stacking up bit by bit for them. I think that's really lovely.
Yeah, it's my question was, is what they're doing working? Because it seems like it's such a slow rollout, and it has to be, because, you know, if you kind of get hit with the truth, it's a very tough pill to swallow for most people, and even people that know. But to answer your question about India, I've actually got a few friends there, and I've seen a couple of videos as well about other people who are living in India right now, and they're saying that it's media hype, and it's not as bad as what they're saying. My friends, but, you know, India is such a big place, so it could be bad in one spot and fine in another spot. Even in Australia, it could be the same thing. But you know, it does not surprise me in the slightest that the media would be hyping it up. I saw a chart that had like the death chart, and it had, like, when they introduced ivermectin, and the thing just dropped to the floor. Did you see that one? And then they started doing the rollout, and it just shot through the roof. So not straight away, but, you know, it started to go in that direction. Whether that chart's real, I don't know. I mean, it's you know, it's hard to say.
You do have to question everything, don't you? I mean, I've always been saying to my family for years that when we hear the population of the world, it could be completely made up. And in fact, it must be made up. If what we believe about the tunnels and things, there's whole underworld that aren't calculated in those population. And who's going to check? Who knows? You know, I mean, this is what I mean. So much of the data that we've made so many decisions on, and sort of based so many of our core value opinions on, are completely made up a lot of the time, is what we're starting to see. Or if they're not made up, deliberately manipulated to give a particular you know, opinion. Like, there's so much information. I used to contribute to the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, for years, until I realized who was behind that, and I was absolutely gutted. So I spent a lot of money donating to them.
Can you tell me, because I actually donate to them still, and I'd heard something about that, but I wasn't certain.
Yeah, so very much with Prince Philip, the royal family. So in one respect, they're doing things, and then they're all going out and shooting all the animals. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that a lot of their money is used for very nefarious means. Right. And it's a cover operation and not actually doing what it's meant to be doing.
Like a lot of the other ones.
Presence for that, I've been thinking, you know, I mean, honestly, for years, and this is what I mean when you realize all these things, you're just like, oh my goodness,
crazy, isn't it?
And all things. But one question I wanted to ask you, based on what you were both saying then, because I'm a bit like you, David. Whenever I speak to Janine, I'm always like, well, is it working? Because to me, I go back to what am I seeing with and feeling with my own eyes. So I know for a fact, so we had the Freedom March a couple of weeks ago in London, and we've got another one next week. Now that was beautifully attended. There were, you know, so many people there, but it's still a very small population when you look at the overall numbers of the UK. what I can say is when I go out on a day-to-day basis, I am still the only one without a mask. And to me, the mask is a really, I'm a really good, I think that's a really good visual indicator, that thing, of where people are at, but not just where they're at, because you could still be wearing one and not believe it. But this is the next point I wanted to come on to with you guys is, what do you both think about what most people are doing to actually stand up against this? Because I see a lot of my people I know who don't believe the government agenda of what we're being told, but they're not taking a lot of personal action themselves, which frustrates the hell out of me.
I talk to anyone I know, but yeah, I am a conspiracy in their eyes, I suppose. I don't know what to say and what not to say in terms of what's going to be picked up. But there was one, and I wanted to go backwards, I'm sorry. I'm not answering this directly, but I thought it was a really interesting point, because David, you mentioned ivermectin. And it's a conversation actually Catherine and I had just recently in terms of these swabs that are being used and what's on them, and there's lots of kind of information and scare tactics, etc., as to what's on them and how it's affecting people. Now, I don't think that there are good things in it, but they did do a test with ivermectin, and it dissolved these structures that it was actually creating. So I think
from the swab.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the first instance that I've seen all this kind of, these are the awful results of blah, 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 but this is something to help it, So it's so nice to see both sides of the coin. Yes, it's not good, but this is what we can do about it.
People get hold of that. So if you in the UK wanted to get hold of that, you wouldn't be able to.
HCQ is illegal here.
Pardon?
HCQ is illegal in Australia. It's been banned.
So you cannot, for love or money, because most of the doctors are not compliant. So I tried for ages to get hold of what you just said, the HCQ, and I did manage to get hold of someone, but not through official means. But the ivermectin, you cannot go to your chemist and ask them to give you some, or you can't go. The GPs won't prescribe it. So this is the problem, is yes, you can, and the stuff you get from the animal feeds place is not the same at all. And all the doctors have said, do not take that, because you do not know what's in that and the dosage. The animal stuff is nowhere near as tightly controlled. So that would be very risky to take that. So it's all very well people having that. But if you and I wanted to go and get some today in the UK, we wouldn't be able to. Right. And then we got some from some dodgy internet site that we wouldn't really know whether it was that or not. Do you see what I mean? So how practical is that for people? Okay. It's great they've got that, but you couldn't go to your doctor and say, give me some now. Let's try. Why don't we try? But I tried with some other issues. As you know, I tried massively, David. One of my children, I was trying to get some jab exemption forms for her. Not one, even a few years ago, I could have got doctors in the UK to make a sensible decision on that. Not for love or money would any of them do it now. They just won't do it.
It's really strange. It's almost as if
they're on the line. They're absolute jobs. They will be struck off if they give one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would challenge how useful that is. It's so frustrating. I know if you're very resourceful, there's always a way.
Well, I think it's but it's also, I mean, I know that some people aren't, and some people are aware of what an inflammatory is and what the opposite. So, and I think when your body knows how to heal itself and it's equipped, because we are exactly the same as, a pharmacy, essentially. Our bodies know exactly what to do in order to fix ourselves, but it's giving it that break, isn't it, in order to help it along the way. But I think if this pharmaceutical, drug is a potential help for it, but then I also think, that detoxing and having anti-inflammatories and knowing what an anti-inflammatory is is actually way more beneficial, because it will help all sorts of different issues rather than just one singular kind of attribute, which then potentially also has, you know, a side effect for other things, you know, as all pharmaceutical things do.
Exactly.
And I think we rely way too much on these pharmaceutical things, and they've been, you know, so many people have become so dependent on it. I mean, there's so many examples. My father was given what are they called for the
statins?
Thank you. Statins, and for years he can't feel his feet anymore. He can't feel the front of his leg, you know, all the way up. And then he got quite ill, and he decided to come off these things, and he got worse and worse, but he knew that he just had to come off them. And they told him never to eat any nuts, because it's all the wrong fats in these nuts, you know. And there they are, pumping him full of all this stuff anyway. So he's started eating 100% peanut butter.
Right.
And he swears by this stuff now, and he seems to think that everyone should come off these statins and just eat peanut butter and eat nuts and things. But you know, he's completely and totally indoctrinated into the pharmaceuticals, and fascinating that just one aspect of it he's totally against, but he's quite happy to have his second Jabberwocky.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
What do you do? But you know,
David, in Australia, with your own eyes, are you seeing people becoming more aware and taking action on things?
No, to be honest, because we had our mandate, you know, it was about 2 weeks, I think we had it, and I was the only person in the supermarket not wearing one. And the last time we had that, I was the only person, and it felt a bit weird, you know, going in there. The energy is different, you know, when you go to a place where everybody's doing that. The energy is so tense, and it's really strange. And so, but this time I didn't feel weird at all. I think, you know, a lot's happened for me in the last 2 months in terms of, I guess, coming into my own power in some ways. So going there without it on didn't feel strange at all, even though everybody else was wearing them. But, you know, we had a funny thing where the premier here announced, like, they announced the restrictions being eased or tightened, whatever. And they announced the easing of it for a day or two, and then we had a few cases, so they tightened them again. And just the day before he made the announcement, I saw a guy who I always see walking his dog, and he wasn't wearing his muzzle. And I was at the park at the gym, you know, that working out in the equipment there, and quite a few people I saw didn't have them on. I was like, this is awesome. Like, people are actually starting to get it now. And then he announced tightening, and people started wearing them again. So it's, I don't know. I don't think so, to be honest. And I just kind of connected with a guy who I went to school with recently, and I hadn't spoken to him in ages. And he knows what's going on, but he still wears one, even though he made it himself. Like, he just got a t-shirt, cut a little piece of thing, you know, put some stuff on the end, and it says "I do not consent" on the front. But he only wears it when he goes to the gym or when he goes to the shops and stuff. But he knows exactly what's going on. So there's definitely a lot of people that are wearing it for, let's call it, out of courtesy, you know, maybe that, or because some people also wear them because they don't want to give older people kind of a heart attack. You know what I mean? Like, people that are really indoctrinated will see you not wearing it and think that you're putting their health in danger too. So,
well, I challenge you on that. Sorry to interrupt. I am going to challenge you. I think we make this stuff up. I really think we make this stuff up in our own heads, because for me, I think most of the problem we're in where we are now on the whole scale of all of it is all those people who know there's something up but wear their muzzles anyway.
I agree.
Because every single time, I have never, ever worn I have. I've worn a mask on 2 occasions. Muzzle. Once when my dad was in a hospice and they wouldn't let me in to see him, and he was dying, so I just had to. And the second time was when a vet came to treat a really ill animal that I had, and they wouldn't treat them unless I wore one. So I had a real go at the vet, because we were outside in the open air. I mean, there was absolutely no place anyway. But equally, I couldn't not have my animal treated. But most of the rest of the time, I've never had any of the old people say anything to me at all.
Neither have I.
Just look shocked. And I wonder whether, you know, how there's this argument, I'm not very good at expressing it, but where we put ourselves in our own box of restrictions. So much of our lives, it's coming from here, our head, that we have this own self-talk where we put ourselves in restrictions. But I honestly believe if more people like your friends didn't do it, my husband's a classic example, didn't believe in them at all, but did it just because it was easier, but didn't want to cause a fuss, because that's very much his personality. And we went on a plane to Scotland, and I basically said, I'm not getting on this plane with you if you put that on, because if you believe it works, then I haven't got a problem. You're entitled to your own belief. But because you don't believe it works, but you're just doing it for an early life, you know, grow a pair of balls, you are not getting on that plane with me. And he's never worn one since. So sometimes I think a bit of tough love. I just think, I mean, Rachel, you know, we've had a difficult conversation this morning, but I'm a strong believer in tough love. As a parent, sometimes you have to do the best for your children by being strict with them. With my dogs, if they're about to run across a road and get run over, then I might have to shout at them to stop them. Whereas I wouldn't normally shout at my dogs. So do you see what I mean? I wonder whether this namby-pamby society we've got now, where we're so afraid of offending people, which of course this has been part of the agenda, is why this isn't all stopping quicker. What do you reckon?
True, absolutely true. You know, it's such a simple thing to do, just to go outside without it on, but it's a very difficult thing for people to do, because it's like either they don't know and they just wear it, even if they don't like it. You know, maybe they think it helps, maybe they don't, but they wear it because it's easy, and they don't want to piss people off, or, you know, go against the government's rules or whatever, or they know what's going on and they still wear it because it's just it is. You put yourself in a box, and it comes from fear. But eventually you do kind of have to grow a set of balls, and it's interesting. Like, you hear all these stories about, you know, big guys in the gym with their muzzle on and stuff, or, you know,
nappy.
Yeah, with the nappy on their face, and it's true though, isn't it? I mean, a good question that I've seen a couple of people ask on social media is, where are all the men? Like, where'd they go? Where the hell did they go? Because where are the people standing up for your freedoms and your rights now? Everybody's doing this. Everyone's complying, and it doesn't mean that you have to be violent about it. You just don't do it. You know, you just simply don't do it.
On a different note, actually, because my partner, he still wears. He has this kind of, I suppose, like a little neck scarf thing, and he just pulls it over his face, and it's kind of like I don't know, army style kind of camouflage stuff. And I hate it. I hate the fact that he does it. But he's been, you know, off the radar for many years, and I suppose so he wouldn't ever go onto social media. He finally decided to go on Telegram, but then got so bombarded he just came off it. He's never been on Facebook. You know, he has no physical address, so he doesn't. You know, he's stayed away from this whole thing, and the government and all their shenanigans for so long that I think he just doesn't want to stand out. And he seems to think that people don't ask me why I haven't got one because he's got one on. So there must be something wrong with me, you know, rather than the fact that I just don't believe.
Yeah.
But that's his personal opinion, and he just goes in wearing it, and I just think you foolish.
I feel honesty, and I'm not saying I'm right. By the way, when I say these things, I absolutely am not meaning that I think I'm right. I'm just saying my opinion. But I 100%, in my own personal opinion, from what I've observed, believe this is a part of the problem, because I went to pick my daughter up from Heathrow Airport on Wednesday, and there's signs everywhere saying you are not allowed in without one. And my husband and I just walked in. There were security guards everywhere. And because there was just no way we were wearing one. Not one single security guard or anyone questioned us. We just walked straight past all the police, all the security guards, all everything. Now, I know other people haven't been that lucky, because I've seen some horrific people on trains and things. But personally, I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. I've done it in airports, I've done it on a plane. Okay, it wasn't an international, it was just from the UK to Scotland. So I didn't have to get on a plane to America, which would have probably been a very different issue. But I
even
just think,
even domestically here, they still have to do it.
yeah, but we just didn't. And I don't, in Gatwick, I had to really cause a fuss to do it. But in Scotland, they were absolutely brilliant, and they knew, and they agreed. And
Okay.
like, well, you know, so it was amazing, the attitude. But it was uncomfortable, but it would be more uncomfortable for me not to, because for me, like, my mother's got COPD and she wears one because she doesn't want to cause a fuss. And I know every time she's putting that on, she's putting literally her life in danger because of it. And every time she sees someone without one, she's now really questioning whether she is going to be brave enough and take that step herself. So
it's a brave thing to do.
It is a brave thing to do. So it is interesting, because I mean, I'm wondering whether, again, it's a mindset, because for me personally, I've never considered it brave at all. I'm not a particularly rebellious person, you know. I love school, love education, you know. So yeah. I was quite a goody two shoes at school, because I actually was one of the weird children that really enjoyed it. Whereas my twin sister is complete opposite and has always been the rebel of the family and everything. But I'm for this, it's just a no-brainer to me. I don't feel brave at all doing it. It's just so far back. Just like if I see someone abusing an animal, I don't care how uncomfortable it is, I will say something. So I wonder whether, my mum summed it up perfect to me. She said when she was at school, and even when I was at school, which was a long while ago, you were always scared of the headmaster or the headmistress. You know, if you got sent to the headmaster or headmistress, you were in deep doo-doo. But more importantly, you knew they were going to tell your parents, and your parents were going to be really furious. But now there's no respect at school, because you can't discipline any child or anything. And I think we've got this so namby-pamby society. You know, sometimes, like the conversation we were having off air this morning, Rachel, sometimes it's a bit of tough love that can be the best possible thing. And sometimes I think us being too empathetic with why people are doing it, I don't think is doing society as a whole the favour. If we're not prepared to have those difficult conversations, I think we're part of the problem.
It's the first step, I would say, in taking your freedoms back. You know, everybody has a right to breathe fresh air. You know what I mean? It shouldn't even be an issue. You know, and clearly, there are so many different things. Like people wear them and I can't even breathe when I wear it, or, you know, different things. But it really is, I think, the first step. If everybody didn't do that, that would send a huge message, you know, to the enforcers, you know. But the problem is everybody's got that. Have you seen that video where, and there are other videos like it, but there's one video where there's a woman sitting in a doctor's surgery, and they have a beep. And she's like, you seen that one?
Yes.
You see, yeah, it's the same as that. Nobody wants to be the only person not doing it. So, you know, you go to a place and it's really funny being the only person not doing it, just because you feel very strongly about what's going on, you know.
Absolutely.
Evolution as well. We are herd animals, aren't you? And it's inbred in us, just like really, I mean, I know we're predators, so we're not like a herd of deer or horses, we're sort of in between, but, you know, in nature, that's how you survive, is sort of listening to your elders, isn't it? Or the more experienced members of the tribe to warn you of danger. So it's so cleverly done. I think the thing over here that's really shocked me so much is this get out of jail free card, where as soon as you say you're doing it for someone else, not yourself.
Yeah.
And that is what they
all the responsibility is gone from your
beautifully, because most people I know are saying, well, I'm not doing it for me, I'm doing it to protect other people. And then as soon as you said that, you've almost, like, if you argue against it, you look like an evil person, you know, because I would 100% wear one. I absolutely mean it. I did so much research on this, so much research, because if I thought it was helping people keep them safe,
absolutely,
I would 100% wear one. If I thought that me having a Jabberwocky was really helping vulnerable members of society, I would seriously consider it. I've done enough research to 100% know myself that that's not the case. It's an interesting one, but it's so easy to brainwash people when you can just say, well, I'm doing it for everyone else and that makes me a nice person.
There's that example of a guy that I think puts one on and then he puts another and then he puts another, but he's in a really cold country and you can just see all the air's just coming out of it anyway. So what on earth is the point in this? And you know, it is breathing the carbon dioxide, and it's everything to, you know, lower the immune system. But I just call it a freak show. And so instead of kind of wearing one or getting angry with anybody, I sing and grin at everybody, because I'm also trying to, you know, relax the fact that it is such a freak show and I can't bear it really whilst I'm in there. So it's the only thing I can do in order to cheer me up. But I just sing my heart out basically. But yeah, it is very difficult, isn't it? And Catherine and I had a bit of a I had a bit of a hard time this morning because I went to I was letting out the chickens basically and sorting them out, and whilst I was down there, because we've got a natural little stream in one of our fields, so I was picking up loads of watercress that's just grown crazily randomly. And one of the farmers next door, I asked if he liked watercress. He said, yeah, that he used to get some a few years ago. Anyway, so I thought whilst I was down there, I'd go and pick some watercress for him. And I went around to give it to him. Anyway, he was just getting these bottles ready to go and feed the lambs. So I went to help feed these little lambs, you know, kind of completely going for it on these bottles. And while I was waiting, for when he was getting this milk ready, he showed me these cows next to where I was stood, and there was this beautiful bull. I mean, it was huge. Like the thing, he looked so scary, but then when he came closer, he's got these beautiful eyes, and he said that they're being sold basically, this one bull and these cows, and it is sad. It is really sad to kind of know exactly what is actually going to happen to them. And anyway, I then went to feed these lambs and sent Catherine a voicemail because I was so excited to feed these little lambs. And recently I saw them being born as well. So, you know, it's the whole cycle of things. But the whole thing is set up so that, and Catherine just hit me like a nail into a hammer. And she was, and I don't know if you want to relay this, I'm getting teary, but you know, it's the fact that the animals are scared of the fox, because the fox, you know, can damage the lambs and all the rest of it, and they need their own food. But at the same time, you know, that their worst enemy is literally the shepherd.
Yeah,
you know, and it's the shepherd
sure.
that then, you know, takes them off to be slaughtered, and you know, and then it's supposedly natural for us to eat meat and the adrenochrome stuff inside the in the meat. Sorry, but you know, and
do they put that in the meat? Oh, you mean as it's
part of it? So my argument has always been, David, that it's
I don't eat meat.
Some of this stuff that's been happening with children recently, and this substance. And I've been going on for years as an animal lover saying, but that's exactly what happens when we send our animals to the slaughter.
Yeah. True. Yeah.
It's a completely different argument that if you're a tribe living in wherever you're living and in a natural thing, and you have to kill one animal to sustain yourself, is a very different experience to loading animals onto a truck, taking them to the slaughterhouse. I know they're sentient beings. And Rachel mentioned earlier, you know, one of the things I do with animals, I'm an animal iridologist, and I look into their eyes to pick up health issues. And it's so true when they say the eyes are the window to the soul. Because when you look into anyone's eyes, if you go and do it now with someone with you and you look intensely into that someone else's eyes, it's such a overwhelming experience, isn't it? You know that they're seeing really deep inside of yourself. So what I was saying to Rachel is, I said, well, it's all very nice you telling me how cute this is, but you know what's just about to happen to them. Why don't you do something about it? Because to me, I equate that with what's happening in us human world. We know what's going to happen, but it's easier for us to not do something about it. So I gave Rachel some tough love and made her cry, because I said, well, you know, you're feeding those lambs and it's the shepherd that sends them off to slaughter. It's not the wolf or the fox that kills them. It's us humans that they've built a personal bond with. And to me, that's the ultimate betrayal. And you've looked and you've told me how beautiful these cows and bulls are. And the farmer said to you, he's sending them off. But why don't you talk to him and see if there's another option? Why don't you see if you can help him keep those? You know, how much would he make from doing that? And how much money would we need to be able to give him for him to keep those?
Yeah.
And to slaughter. There's always another way. And for me, I just equate a lot of what I've seen us humans do and take as acceptable over the years with animals as what's happening to us now.
Well, and almost McDonald's, I'm sure you've heard about that.
Yeah, human food.
Yeah, so it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, just all the, and I know what's the place?
Do you think people believe that, David? Do you think people believe that? Because whenever I've said that to my sisters or something, they think
it's madness, absolute madness.
They would have me put in a mental home if they could, you know?
Yeah, my mum said that to me countless times over the last year.
Yeah.
You know, but it's true. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Yeah, we would. Yeah. It's unbelievable, all the stuff that's been happening. Completely unbelievable. And I get that, you know, when, you know, to even say that there are a handful of people controlling the world, that's unbelievable. I understand. But it's so much deeper than that. And, you know, of course it's crazy. You know, whenever you put forward an idea that challenges somebody's belief system, they're going to think it's crazy, especially on this scale. So it doesn't mean that it's crazy. It just means that they're not aware to it yet. They haven't thought about that yet. And the same goes with the school system. You know, you can look at the school system in so many different ways. You can argue the point that, well, we don't know what kids are going to do when they're older, so let's just teach them all the same thing. Okay, sure. But why does it have to be those things? Why doesn't it something else like art or, you know, or music, or, you know, like, why do we have to focus so much on that small percent? You know, like kids still learning how to do fractions and all these crazy things and some very difficult stuff, you know, to be honest, unless you're a mathematician, you don't need any of that stuff in later life. You know, there are so many other things that you could learn. Yes, I believe that you really should know some simple maths and know how to multiply, divide, and all that stuff, for sure. But you don't need to how to times fractions together. You don't need to how to do long division. You know, you don't need to learn how to do all that kind of stuff. And you look at the school system, and it's like you spend 12 years there. Imagine what you could achieve if they taught you about how money works, how relationships work, how your mind works, how the universe works, you know, how to verbally communicate, how to communicate in writing, all these different things that you could learn that will really help you in life, you know, rather than all the crap they teach you that's quite honestly just a way to keep you confused and indoctrinated. That's my opinion. Nobody has to buy that. Nobody has to buy that opinion, but it from where I'm standing, it seems to be true. You know,
I still agree. And as a parent, I didn't question any of that when I sent my children to school. I admit it. You know, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but at least I realise now, Rachel, when you and I first met, one of your passions was going to be, you know, teaching children in a different way. And I know we're running out of time now, guys, David, and I'd love to have another one with you two, because I just love it. But one thing on the positive side of things that I'd just really like to have a little discussion on before we end, on the positive side of things, what makes me feel so hopeful for the future is all of us mad nutters that could live really happily together in our mental institution where everyone wants to send us. Look how happy we all are. So of all the people that I know who believe what we believe, I can honestly say they're the healthiest, happiest people that I know at the moment. And if we know what we know, and we've still got this overriding sense of amazing possibility and future, I think that's really amazing and is really encouraging for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. It's difficult to people always say, oh, not enough's happening, you know. And,
yes.
And what they really mean, I think, is there haven't been any really big arrests yet, you know, or maybe the RV hasn't been announced, but things are happening all the time. You know, nobody was expecting the Suez Canal. You know, that happened. And and that was a big, if you knew what to look for, or if you were plugged into the right, you know, information sources, that was a big thing, you know. So we kind of just have to be very patient. You know, this is an exercise in patience, if anything at all. And you know, things will happen in divine timing, right? Things will happen when they need to happen, and it will happen. But I think that the really though, like Michelle Fielding says, it's like we have to step into our own light. We have to step into our own power. The more people that do that, the more people that get rid of this, you know, the quicker things will happen. So, you know, and it's the tip of the iceberg, but it really just comes down to the individual, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's the voting, it's using the banks, you know, it's all using all those nefarious systems.
It's a lot of things, yeah. But you know, but we do have the power, you know, and I think people forget that. You know, people forget that the government works for us, even though that may not have been the case. They're working for the corporation for so long. But
yeah, and there's so many positive things like that. I mean, I've through this process this last year, you know, I mean, Rachel and a couple of other friends have been my absolute backbone. And I would find it very difficult if I didn't have friends like Rachel and Carol and Sienna to really, you know, sort of be there when you need that shoulder to cry on, when you think I'm the only one fighting it. But meeting people like you, David, meeting people like Janine, Michelle, it's so encouraging. And I think we know from what we know that what's coming is really worth waiting for. And we also know whatever little step it might be that each individual takes, it doesn't matter how small, just one step each day is what I would say to people. One step each day, one step each day, because it is worth putting, like you said right at the beginning, David, I think it's worth just building that self-resilience to realize that it's worth being mocked a bit if it's really moving things forward in the right area.
Yeah, because the energetics behind it, although you don't necessarily see it in front of your face, is changing dramatically in the background, you know, so they're edging things forward in order to wake people up, although we don't necessarily see it in front of our eyes. I think probably Janine is correct that, you know, that they are stacking up these I suppose these scenarios and understandings and those slip-ups that are happening in the media, and they're going to just become more and more prominent. I think, I think the truth will come out probably June.
I hope so.
In my personal opinion, and I think things are going to ramp up, you know, to the worst they possibly could ever be in May, and that's
in terms of like what most people would assume is like the push to kind of end it all, if that makes sense. Like you think things are gonna, and in June that's where the tracks will flip, and we're going towards this big crash, and all of a sudden things will flip and we'll go towards something good.
I mean, it's all about division as well, isn't it? So that they'll probably let I mean, we've been in lockdown forever here, right? Literally.
You guys have. It's been pretty much a whole year, hasn't it?
Oh, it has, David. It really has. It's just been horrific. We're now just allowed to eat outside in pubs outside. And it's been so cold. It's been the coldest April. I mean, you've got to laugh because otherwise you cry. So, you know, the pubs opened up and it's just a way of socializing things. And then we're all eating outside and it's like a comedy show because we're all in our hats and our gloves. And so it's been the coldest April on record. It's hysterical, but we've done it because we're tough and we're Brit. But we have been on lockdown forever here. We haven't had the curfews. So it's been different to some places in Australia and Canada, but it's been really harsh. And the poor youngsters, you know, the young people and the old people have had it so tough. They really have. Yeah.
But in the division side of things, I think, you know, they are going to let people free and then they're going to lock down again. But then they're going to turn the people against each other. So the people like us who don't like the Jabberwocky and the people that do, they're going to say, you know, well, this is why you're going locked down again, because it's because of these people. And then they're just going to completely lose it, and it's probably their way of kind of, right, let's escalate this. Yeah, but
people need to be pushed to the point where they just won't stand it anymore. And up until now, it's been awful, but not quite bad enough. I know it has for some people, and it's just some people have had just the most terrible time of it. But in terms of the mass population, they haven't quite got us all to the stage where people are going to go into mass revolt, you know.
Well, what were your thoughts about, you know, either of you? What were your thoughts about what Boris Johnson said about no more effing lockdowns? We can just watch the bodies pile up. Did you see that? That was in our paper here.
It was apparently in the paper here that he said it, but I never saw it. The problem is I'm in that difficult position where I don't watch the mainstream news or read the papers at all. So people will send me an occasional clip, but he said a few things recently, Boris, but, you know, none of us think the bodies will pile up. Well, we do, but not from what they're talking about, from something else. So I think he has been, to me, personally, and I don't know at all because I don't watch him regularly enough to make really an informed decision, but for me, the impression I always get when I see him is he's being told what to do, and what he's being told he completely disagrees with. So whenever he gets a moment of strength, he'll come out with what his true sort of things are, because he's come out with a few real good ones. And I don't believe at all that he believes what he's being made to do, but I don't believe he's actually got much power as an individual either. I think he's been, unfortunately, a puppet, and I think the power lives with the other more nefarious members of the cabinet, is my personal opinion.
Yeah, I didn't see that at all. I mean, I don't watch TV. I haven't, but in fact, I think the last time I owned a TV, you know, there was ones with the really huge backs.
That
was the last TV. You know, that now they're all flat screen.
A long time ago.
I haven't had a TV for so many years.
That's good.
But yeah, and I don't read the newspapers. It's only when my mother she buys a newspaper every Saturday, and I basically use them to start a fire on my log burner.
Yeah.
And I get to see like little headlines from October last year and kind of all the rest of it, all the old newspapers.
And they're all the same. That's the funny thing. Exactly. The funny thing about the MSM these days is that every single night it's pretty much the same thing, you know, just fear, like a whole half an hour of different stories related to CV. And it's just, you know, sometimes I catch it, you know, sometimes I catch it and I just can't stand it. It's just so fear-based.
But it's so easy to almost make fun of. My partner and I did a video about, you know, this person, you know, had an accident, head was chopped off, he definitely died from COVID, you know, and this person.
I'm going to have to go now, guys.
Sorry.
I've got to go because I've got people coming. It's been so wonderful speaking to you. Thank you so much, David. I've absolutely loved it.
Thanks for having me on.
Again sometime.
Absolutely. I would welcome that for sure.
Have an amazing time. Keep us informed of what's going on in Australia, and we'll keep you informed of what's happening here.
Yes, have a lovely evening. Thank you so much for your time, David.
Thank you too, and have a lovely Sunday.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.